He had all the wealth a man could dream of, but not even a fortune could bring back his son's voice. For 2 long years, silence filled every room of the mansion, until a humble carpenter and his daughter walked in, carrying nothing but patience, kindness, and a quiet strength that would change everything. What happened next was something no one saw coming. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. If this story moved you, we love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. Michael Hartford had built his fortune on vision and hard work, but none of it meant anything when he returned to a home that felt empty. 2 years had passed since the accident that took his wife, Emily. Their son, Owen, had been in the back seat that day. He survived without a scratch on his body, but something inside him had shut down. Since that moment, the boy had not spoken a single word. Michael tried everything money could buy. He hired speech therapists, child psychologists, and even specialists who flew in from other countries. He brought in art teachers, therapy animals, and the newest technology designed to help children express themselves. None of it worked. Each caregiver, no matter how skilled, would leave within hours or days. Some left with kind words, others with frustration in their eyes. They all said the same thing. Owen wouldn't let them in. The mansion stood on the edge of a quiet hillside, surrounded by manicured gardens that looked perfect from the outside. Inside, silence echoed through every hallway. Michael often found himself standing outside Owen's room, listening for any sign of his voice. It never came. When the position for yet another caregiver opened, Michael didn't expect much. The housekeeper, Maria, answered the door to find Daniel Ross standing there. He wasn't dressed like the professionals who had come before. His shirt was simple, his jacket worn but clean, and his eyes carried a calm steadiness. He was a widower too, raising his 10-year-old daughter, Clara, on his own since his wife passed away from illness. Daniel had not come chasing a high salary or a prestigious role. He was a carpenter by trade, taking small jobs to make ends meet. When he heard about the position, he thought the pay would help him catch up on bills. He didn't imagine it would lead him into someone else's deepest sorrow. Maria gave him a look of doubt. "You're the 32nd person to try," she said softly. "No one lasts here." Daniel gave a small shrug. "I'm not here to fix him," he replied. "I'm just here to be here." Michael wasn't home when Daniel arrived. He preferred to watch from a distance, checking the cameras to see how each new attempt would go. He had learned not to get his hopes up. Owen was in his usual place, under the old oak table in the sunroom, the same spot where his mother used to read to him. The light filtered in through tall windows, dust floating in the air. Daniel stepped into the room, but didn't move toward the boy. Instead, he sat on the floor a few feet away, leaning against the wall. From his bag, he pulled out a small block of wood and a pocket carving knife. Without a word, he began shaping the wood into something new. The soft sound of the knife scraping against wood filled the air. Daniel didn't look at Owen, and he didn't ask questions. He simply worked, letting the moment breathe. Michael watched from his office, surprised. Most people tried to engage Owen immediately, forcing conversation or offering toys. This man was different. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't even watching Owen directly. After a while, Daniel set the half-carved shape on the floor between them. It looked like the beginnings of a small bird. He didn't say it was for Owen. He just left it there and continued carving another piece. Owen's eyes flickered toward the bird, then back to Daniel. No words came, but for the first time in months, there was a spark of curiosity in the boy's gaze. The afternoon passed slowly. Maria brought tea for Daniel and a plate of cookies for Owen. Neither spoke, but Owen reached out, took one cookie, and stayed in the room. When Daniel finally left for the day, the wooden bird remained in the same spot on the floor. As Daniel walked out to his old pickup truck, Michael stayed in his study, thinking about what he had seen. It wasn't progress. Not yet, but it also wasn't the usual wall of rejection. That night, Michael passed by the sunroom before heading upstairs. The wooden bird was gone from the floor. It sat on Owen's bookshelf, next to a framed picture of Emily. Michael stood there in the quiet, the weight in his chest shifting ever so slightly. Perhaps this time might be different. Perhaps the silence that had ruled their lives for so long had finally met its first small crack. The next morning, Daniel returned to the mansion, carrying a small cloth bag. He greeted Maria with a polite nod and walked straight to the sunroom, where he had first seen Owen. The boy was in the same spot under the table, knees drawn to his chest, eyes distant. Daniel didn't speak. He sat on the floor, pulled out another block of wood, and began carving. This time, he shaped the wood slowly into a fox. Each small movement of the knife was steady, unhurried. The faint sound of the blade, scratching against the grain, filled the quiet space. Owen glanced at him a few times, but quickly looked away. After a while, Daniel placed the partly carved fox in the same spot where he had left the wooden bird the day before. Then, without a word, he returned to his work. The second chapter of this unlikely story began later that day when Daniel came back after lunch with his daughter, Clara. She was bright-eyed, wearing a simple cardigan, and carrying a small sketchbook. Clara didn't approach Owen directly. She sat on the floor beside her father and began drawing. After a few minutes, she held up her sketch to Daniel. "This is you," she said with a little smile. "Your hair's messier than in real life." Daniel chuckled softly, and Clara went back to drawing. Without looking at Owen, she asked, "Do you like animals?" She didn't expect an answer, but she kept talking as if they were already friends. "I think foxes are smart. I like drawing them." Owen shifted slightly, his eyes flicking toward her sketchbook. Clara noticed, but didn't make a big deal of it. Instead, she started sketching a fox beside a tree. "You don't have to talk," she said quietly. "You can just look if you want." There was no response, but Owen stayed where he was. In the study upstairs, Michael watched from the security feed. He had seen countless attempts to reach his son, but this was different. Daniel and Clara weren't forcing a connection. They were simply living in the same space, letting Owen choose if he wanted to join in. After half an hour, Clara slid her drawing toward the edge of the table so Owen could see it. It showed two foxes, one larger and one smaller, standing together under a tree. Owen's eyes lingered on the picture, then moved to the wooden fox Daniel had been carving. Daniel caught the look, but didn't say a word. He simply finished the carving, brushed away the shavings, and set the completed fox on the floor. Owen reached out slowly and picked it up. He ran his fingers along the smooth edges, studying the small details. Michael leaned closer to the screen in disbelief. It was the first time in months he had seen his son take something from another person without resistance. Later, when Daniel and Clara packed up to leave, Owen placed the carved fox next to the bird on his bookshelf. Two small wooden shapes, side by side. The next few days followed a similar rhythm. Daniel carved, Clara drew. Sometimes they spoke quietly to each other. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Owen began sitting a little closer each day. He even watched Clara's pencil strokes from under the table, his curiosity growing. By the end of the week, Owen was no longer hiding under the table. He sat cross-legged on the rug near them, silent but present. Clara would occasionally ask him small questions, what color he liked best, whether foxes should have names, but she never waited for answers. She let him choose silence without making it awkward. Michael, still watching from a distance, felt a mix of emotions. There was gratitude, yes, but also a heavy guilt. Why had it taken strangers to reach his son in ways he could not? One afternoon, when rain tapped softly against the tall windows, Owen surprised everyone. He stood, walked over to Clara, and handed her a sheet of paper from his own sketchpad. On it was a simple pencil drawing of a small bird and a fox under a tree. Clara smiled and held the paper gently. "It's beautiful," she said. Daniel glanced at the boy and gave a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that meant more than any loud praise. Michael watched in silence, feeling the shift inside his chest again. The wall that had stood for 2 long years was not gone, but now it had a clear crack, and through that crack, light was beginning to shine. The night the storm came, the wind howled through the hills like a restless spirit. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the mansion, and the old trees bent under the force of the wind. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and heavy, shaking the ground. In his room, Owen lay curled under his blanket, eyes wide open. Storms had frightened him ever since the accident. The sudden flashes of light and the booming thunder always brought back memories he could not put into words. When lightning struck close, he sat up, heart racing, breath quickening. Down the hall, Daniel was in the guest room, reading quietly while Clara slept. The sound of the storm grew louder, and then he heard it, a soft, choked gasp from somewhere beyond his door. He rose without hesitation. Michael was still in his study, going over papers he could not focus on. He heard the same faint sound through the house's silent corridors. But before he could react, Daniel had already stepped into the hallway. Owen's door was half open. Daniel pushed it gently and saw the boy sitting on the edge of his bed, his hands pressed against his ears, eyes fixed on the lightning outside. Daniel didn't rush forward or speak right away. Instead, he knelt down a few feet away, giving Owen space. The next flash of lightning lit the room in a brief white glare. Owen's breath came faster. Daniel reached out his arms slowly, a quiet offer without demand. After a moment, Owen stood, crossed the space between them, and stepped into the safety of those arms. Daniel wrapped the blanket tighter around the boy and held him close. No words passed between them. The storm still roared outside, but inside that small circle of warmth, the fear began to loosen its hold. Daniel stayed with him until Owen's breathing steadied, until the boy's head rested against his shoulder. In the doorway, unseen, Michael stood frozen. He had never seen his son seek comfort so openly since the day they lost Emily. It was as if the boy had finally found a place where his fear could rest. Daniel carried Owen back to bed, sat beside him, and stayed until sleep came. When he finally rose to leave, Michael stepped forward. There was no need for a long conversation. A quiet nod passed between them. The next morning, the storm had moved on. The air was fresh, and sunlight streamed into the sunroom. Owen appeared there earlier than usual. Daniel was already carving, Clara beside him with her sketchbook. Owen sat closer than he ever had before. They worked in companionable silence, but something in Owen's eyes had changed. There was a new steadiness, as if the night before had built a bridge that no one else had managed to build. Michael watched from his usual place in the study, but this time he did not feel like a distant observer. He felt something else, a pull to join them. Over the next few days, Daniel began showing Michael small ways to reach his son. They were not complicated steps, Simply moments like joining Owen at the table without speaking, or letting him choose an activity without pushing for conversation. Sometimes they would work on a puzzle together. Other times, they simply sat in the sunroom, each doing their own quiet task. Slowly, the tension in Owen's shoulders began to fade. Then, one evening, as Clara sketched and Daniel sanded the edges of a wooden fox, Owen began humming a faint tune. The notes were soft, almost hesitant, but Michael recognized them instantly. It was the lullaby Emily used to sing to him. Michael's breath caught. Daniel glanced at him and gave the smallest nod, as if to say, "This is the beginning." That night, when Michael walked past Owen's room, the boy was asleep with both the carved fox and bird beside his pillow. The storm had come and gone, but what it left behind was more than fallen branches and puddles. It had left a sign that healing was possible, that the silence holding Owen had loosened just enough for hope to take root. Michael knew they weren't at the end of the journey, but for the first time in 2 long years, he believed they were truly moving forward. Winter settled gently over the hillside, and the days grew shorter. The mansion, once heavy with silence, now carried a softer rhythm. Owen was still quiet most of the time, but he was no longer hiding. He joined Daniel and Clara in the sunroom almost every day, sometimes drawing, sometimes just watching. Michael had started sitting with them too, slowly learning how to be part of this new space of calm. On a Saturday morning just before the holidays, the smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen. Michael stood at the counter, frowning at a pan of pancakes that were quickly turning too dark. He was trying to follow Emily's old recipe, the one she used to make for Owen. The results were far from perfect. Clara sat at the table, sketching, while Daniel leaned against the doorway. "You're burning them," Clara said lightly, her eyes still on her drawing. Michael sighed and tried flipping one, only to tear it in half. "I guess I'll never get these right," he muttered. From the corner of the room came a sound so small it almost went unnoticed. Owen was sitting at the table, watching. His lips moved, and then the words came out, soft but clear. "They're just like Mom's." The room went still. Daniel froze. Clara looked up. Michael's heart felt like it stopped altogether. What did you say?" Michael asked, his voice shaking. Owen met his father's eyes. "They're like Mom's. Hers burn too sometimes." Tears welled up in Michael's eyes before he could stop them. He set down the spatula, walked to his son, and knelt beside him. "I miss her," Owen said quietly. "I do too," Michael whispered, pulling him into a hug. Every single day. For a moment, it felt as if the weight of the past 2 years lifted, just enough for them to breathe again. From that day forward, Owen spoke more. Sometimes just a few words, sometimes whole sentences. He laughed when Clara made a joke. He asked Daniel about the wooden animals, and slowly he began to share small stories about his mother. Michael, Daniel, and Clara encouraged each step without pushing. They knew the journey was still unfolding, but they also knew the hardest wall had been broken. In the weeks that followed, Michael had an idea. One evening, as the 3 of them sat in the sunroom, he said, "I want to start something, a place for kids like Owen. A place where they can feel safe, where people don't try to fix them, but just be with them." Daniel listened carefully. "What would you call it?" Michael fought for a moment. "Harbor light," he said, "because sometimes all you need is a light in the distance to know you're not lost." Daniel smiled. "I'll help you build it, but only if we do it as equals, not as charity." "Agreed," Michael said. By spring, Harbor Light had opened its doors. It was a small center in the heart of town, filled with spaces for art, music, and quiet conversation. Children who had shut themselves away slowly began to rejoin the world, surrounded by patient hands and open hearts. At the first community event, the hall was filled with soft light and the sound of quiet chatter. Owen, who had been standing near the back, walked toward the piano in the corner. Without a word, he sat down and began to play a gentle melody. It was simple but steady, the same tune his mother once hummed. Michael stood watching, his chest tight but full. Daniel and Clara stood beside him, both smiling. In that moment, Michael understood something deeply. The healing hadn't come in a sudden burst. It had been built in countless quiet moments, in shared silences, in small acts of trust. When the last note faded, the room stayed still for a heartbeat, as if everyone there knew they had witnessed something rare. Then came the applause, soft, respectful, and warm. Michael looked at his son, his friend, and the girl who had helped bridge the gap. They were not just people brought together by circumstance. They were family. And in the glow of that winter evening, Michael knew they would carry that light forward, not just for themselves, but for anyone still waiting for hope to find them.